Thanks for joining us for this Connect to the Capitol Extra on Wednesday, April the 2nd. And shortly after 2 o'clock, a 21-year-old junior at the University of South Carolina, Nate Baker, was struck and killed by a hit-and-run accident. The person who was driving that truck drove away, leaving the injured Baker left to die on the city streets of Columbia, South Carolina. That has led to an investigation that has led into a case now that is going to be going a lot further than just a simple hit and run, because the person who was responsible for that accident was an undocumented person in the United States of America. That has some levels of implication in what goes on not only in South Carolina, how this case is getting prosecuted, but it has implications also on a case that's just come down from the U.S. Supreme Court. Joining us for this Connect to the Capitol Extra, the Attorney General of South Carolina, our good friend, Alan Wilson. Mr. Attorney General, thanks so much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thank you for having me back.
We had a terrible tragedy happen last week when this 21-year-old junior business major from Virginia, who has gone to his parents' alma mater, is killed at a major intersection that I know you and I have driven through and been through many times, right there on the corner of Blossom and Assembly Street. When that happened, if that happens anywhere, it's a terrible tragedy. But there's a twist in this, in the fact that the 24-year-old who was responsible for the accident as well was an undocumented person in America. Tell us how in the world that impacts you as a dad, for one, but also the implications that this has on you in the Attorney General's office now taking this case on straight on.
Well, first, let me say this. As a dad and as a human being, our hearts and our prayers go out to the Baker family and the larger USC community this young man was a member of. It's very tragic. It was a horrible thing that occurred. And again, I want to remind people, no matter what the politics, the laws, all the things being debated going on right now at the state and national level, a life was lost that day. What I can tell you about the case, obviously because it's ongoing, I'm limited into how much I can get into the specifics of that day. What I can tell you is that the defendant in this case entered the United States as a teenager in 2016. He was unaccompanied and he was here illegally. He was released to the custody of a family member who we also believe was here illegally, and he was given an order of removal from an immigration judge in 2018. From 2018 forward, he was flying under the radar and no one knew where he was. And then, of course, until this incident occurred, no one could put their hands on him. He was charged that day by the Columbia Police Department with hit and run involving a fatality, driving without a license, failure to yield the right of way, and also failure to render aid or stop and give information. So these were all charges that obviously are traffic charges, except for the felony hit and run resulting in fatality. Our reasons for getting into this case, and several people have asked me that, our office has been involved in a number of ongoing broader investigations related to the issue of illegal immigration. I can't go into that right now, but we are very involved in identifying the illegal immigration issues here in South Carolina, especially as it's related to a lot of the violent criminals we see in the state of South Carolina. So I've been in contact with law enforcement around the state. We've been working on getting law enforcement agencies signed up under the 287G program, which is a federal program that allows local law enforcement to engage in ICE detention and deportation operations.
So basically what you're saying with this 287G program is you're deputizing local law enforcement to do the work that the national immigration ICE can't accomplish on its own.
Well, what you're doing is they're force multipliers. ICE can come in and take a sheriff's office or a police department and they can bless you, right? They can say, we're going to deputize you to be a force multiplier. In other words, we're going to train you, we're going to provide oversight. You're not just creating a rogue agency. You're still under the oversight of ICE, and you can help us. Also, for instance, let's say you're a sheriff's department or a highway trooper and you pull over someone for driving under the influence, and in the car there's 3 illegal aliens in the back seat of the car. Obviously, you'd have to call ICE to do those enforcement operations, but if you're a member of the 287G program, you can arrest and detain those individuals incidental to the DUI arrest, which you normally wouldn't be able to do but for being a member. So basically, it puts you on the team of immigration enforcement if you're local law enforcement. Other administrations in the past have fought the use of 287G. They've watered it down. This has become a priority for the current presidential administration, the Trump administration, in beefing up 287G. So what we have done is I have been working with our ICE officials in South Carolina, Homeland Security Investigations. I've met with nearly every sheriff in the state. Every sheriff in the state has received a letter from me, and I've met with numerous police chiefs about becoming members of this program so that we can better help our federal partners enforce immigration laws here in South Carolina.
So you have a 24-year-old Rosali Fernandez Cruz who was here illegally. You have no direct ties of him to any of these other bigger issues, perhaps. We're not saying that he was here with a gang or that he was involved in anything else at the moment. It's simply the fact that he was involved in a hit and run and fled and someone died. That's one portion of this. But the rest of the shell that goes around this is the fact that there's a broader issue of undocumented people coming into America and what has to be done to address those issues.
So let me expand on what you just said. The broader issues, and this is, I've said this publicly, there are some things I can't talk about because of the security and of the investigations, but what I can tell you is that we are engaged in lots of drug interdiction. We work with local, state, and federal partners. We have a state grand jury. We prosecute numerous drug trafficking cases. We've seen a spike in fentanyl. We've seen a spike in a lot of drug trafficking in South Carolina over the last 5 years, and in nearly every instance it originates in Mexico with cartels, working with violent gangs like Tren de Aragua MS-13. In fact, we've even been told by officials down on the border that the Chinese government is funding a lot of these fentanyl labs, the fentanyl that's being piped in. I looked at the numbers a week or two ago, and I think we have seized roughly 144 kilos of fentanyl in the last 4 or 5 years. That's 1 kilo of fentanyl is enough to kill 500,000 people, according to the DEA. Half a kilo of fentanyl. We've seized 144. So when people talk about why I'm so hot on this immigration issue, and again, I don't begrudge, and I don't think you or any reasonable person would begrudge someone wanting to come to bring their family to a place like America.
Right. I mean, we have the privilege of having been born in a country like America, and you have a lot of folks who are trying to get to the American dream of opportunity and prosperity.
Right.
I mean, you don't necessarily see millions of people trying to make their way from South America through Central America and getting into America simply to pass fentanyl. That's not the majority of people,
right.
But in that train of people, you have people seeping in who are being part of a drug train that is coming into America.
That is 100% true. I mean, you've had millions of people that came in over the last several years, and embedded in those millions of people, there were a lot of people who were seeking a better life, like people did when they came to Ellis Island 100 years ago, right? But within that wave of millions that came in, you have Chinese nationals, you have members of proxy terrorist groups, like Hezbollah and ISIS and others. You have members of violent gangs. Tren de Aragua is a foreign terrorist organization. It was a transnational criminal organization under Biden. It's a terrorist organization under Trump. It's been stood up and supported by the Maduro regime down in Venezuela. It was born in a prison. MS-13. These gangs are being used to basically be an incursion into the United States to facilitate a lot of the illicit drug trafficking and potential other trafficking, like human trafficking and other violent crimes that go with those types of crimes.
Right.
And so when when I was at the southern border last August, I met with federal and state officials from Texas, and they showed me a heat map, meaning a map of the United States where TDA, that Tren de Aragua gang, is. They were not in South Carolina in August, according to federal officials. We have already had TDA arrests in the last month and a half here in South Carolina. They are in South Carolina now. And I've gone on operations with law enforcement to actually go get these individuals. They're dangerous. They are here not for a better life, or they're not going to contribute to a better life for our citizenry. They are going to exploit and undermine that way of life.
So when we start talking about the issue then of undocumented immigrants coming into America, they're coming in here. We have laws that say you have to be, come through the front door, so to speak. And we've got a lot of people kind of seeping around the fence, sliding in the back door, going through the basement, whatever it might be. And with those, you have these insurgents, these terrorist insurgents, to the degree that you're describing them here, with Tren de Aragua and other groups that are coming in, and they're leading to the deaths of thousands of people on a daily basis in America with the drug issues that we've seen with fentanyl. So all of these things are weaving themselves together. What is it that your office is trying to do to really address this war front against organized crime coming up from our southern border?
I'll come back to that question, but I do want to go back to one other point. It's not just what these violent criminals that are coming in that wave of illegals, right, that they're doing in our communities and around our country. Last summer, the Inspector General's Office for the Department of Homeland Security said that they had over 320,000 unaccompanied minors. These are kids from south of the border, from South American countries and Mexico, who were brought over by a lot of these adults and used kind of a subterfuge to give the imprimatur that they're a family. These kids were brought. They cannot find over 300,000 kids, unaccompanied minors, who were brought into this country. What crime do you think that could be feeding? Human trafficking, potentially. And so this has been a cornerstone of what I've been fighting for the last 12, 13 years in South Carolina, and so it's feeding it. Back to your question, what are we doing? First off, there was a Supreme Court win that just came down earlier this week where the Supreme Court stopped the judge from enjoining the President of the United States from enforcing the Alien Enemies Act, which basically allows you to remove people who are enemy aliens of the United States.
Because that law goes back to the 1798.
Yeah,
right.
and honestly, it's 10 years older than our Constitution, and we still enforce our Constitution,
right.
And hasn't been changed by law since then. But the president was using this law, which has been since codified and used in 3 other instances: War of 1812 and our 2 world wars. But it is used as a tool and a resource for the president operating under his Article 2, and that's lawyerese for his constitutional authority to protect the national security of the United States as the commander-in-chief. And so he was using this law to remove these violent, terrorists, these gang members, and a district court judge in Washington, D.C., stopped that from happening. Well, I led a 27-state coalition along with the Commonwealth of Virginia. He and I led that 27-state group to the Supreme Court to support the Trump administration's overturning of that injunction, basically overturning that district judge. And the Supreme Court agreed with us this week. And the Supreme Court said, yes, aliens do have due process rights. They do have the ability to receive notice that they're being deported and ability to have a hearing on the matter. But a judge in the District of Columbia overreached in his power and authority. The Supreme Court basically said, you can't do that. You got to go down to Texas. That is where the detention occurred.
So let's dig into this part a little bit, because you hear of this phrase, and sometimes you might have heard this if you're watching some other show or you're watching an entertainment thing. Well, they're just judge shopping. They're sitting here trying to find the right judge who's going to rule things in the right way. Is that what happened in this particular case, or is this just the justice system balancing itself back
If you're
out?
asking Alan Wilson for his opinion,
Alan Wilson's opinion
is yes, they were judge shopping, because one of the claims they were bringing, and I'm going to use legalese words here.
We have a few minutes for legalese words. Go ahead.
Yeah, habeas claims, right? Which is basically you can't detain. It's unlawful detentions, and they were going to bring a writ of habeas against the government, the Trump administration, saying that you're detaining these people unlawfully. But they dropped that because they knew that could only be brought in the state of Texas. And they went with other claims, like Administrative Procedures Act and other potential federal claims.
Because reality is the state of Texas has a very different viewpoint on issues of immigration, political viewpoints, sometimes even stronger than the state of South Carolina on certain issues. And so is this basically they couldn't get a good liberal judge in Texas, so they shopped this to D.C.?
It is my position that they were trying to get to the answer they wanted as quickly as they could, and it didn't really matter to them that they were bringing the right legal claims or that they were bringing them in the right jurisdiction. The Supreme Court said, if you want relief, meaning you want, these people not deported, you have to go to the right court, the right jurisdiction, and you have to bring the right legal action. You did neither in this case. You were in the wrong church. You weren't in the right church, and you weren't in the right pew. You got to go to the right church, and you got to be in the right pew. So you got to bring the right claim, and you got to be in the right jurisdiction. They weren't in either.
And that is a tool that the Supreme Court uses, a way for them to be able to manage what does come to the highest court in the land, to be able to say, wait a minute, this is not our issue to deal with because you didn't even go about it the right way.
Right. And by the way, it was a 5-4 decision. So you had the 5 conservative justices, you had one presumptive conservative justice and the 3 liberal members of the court on the other side. And basically all 9 justices agreed that everyone has due process. I agree with that. The Trump administration says, yes, of course you should have your rights of due process, but you got to do it in the right location. You got to bring the right law or bring the right legal claim. They did neither in this particular case.
Okay, so when we take a look at this, when we were talking beforehand, you talked about the fact that this is, for lack of a better phrase, this is kind of a qualified ruling by the Supreme Court.
Qualified win for the Trump administration.
For the Trump administration, which basically the Trump administration's stance is, we're going to stop illegal immigration coming through our porous borders and getting people, undocumented people coming into America. What would then qualify that? What's going to make a change going about this the right way? Because the president does have certain rights under the Constitution of the way that he sees the execution of these laws. What does this actually mean for undocumented workers in America and keeping undocumented workers from coming into America?
So in the metaphor that I've used, the Trump administration has reduced the, according to the numbers I've seen, is nearly, I think like 98, 99% of illegal crossings have been cut out. It's like illegal crossings have been reduced by like nearly 100%, like 98, 99%. Okay, so basically that's akin to us plugging the holes in the boat. Right. But we still got a lot of water that's been leaking into the boat for the last several years.
Right.
You know, under the policies of the previous administration, which had different priorities. The Trump administration is now bailing out the water out of the boat. And so we're using every legal vehicle they are, and we are supporting them in using every legal vehicle that they can. The Alien Enemies Act was it's like a bucket from 1798 that the Trump administration is using to bail out the water. Some people don't like that. They don't like it because of its age. You know, it's a 200-plus-year-old law. They don't like the fact that they feel like the president is trying to circumvent due process for these illegal aliens. What the Alien Enemies Act allows a president to do is in a time of war or in the time of an incursion or an invasion or an incursion, right, it allows the president to circumvent that. Well, the president has designated the Tren de Aragua and some of these other gangs as foreign terrorist organizations.
It's that, and so that is a reason for doing that, because in doing
it's an incursion.
Right. It creates the legal framework from which to then be able to use this alien.
Yeah. Well, if Osama bin Laden, if he were still around and he were walking around the streets, you know, he'd be an example of someone, or if members of ISIS or Hezbollah or some of these terrorist proxy organizations. What about Chinese spies, you know, people that are engaging in an incursion into the interior of the United States to do things that that aren't here to seek a better life, but they're to break the law. Right. The president, under his, and again, lawyer words, Article 2 powers under the U.S. Constitution, which is to engage in foreign diplomacy and foreign affairs and basically promote the security of the United States. And that is what he is doing under his commander-in-chief power. And there are people out there that are trying to prevent him from doing that. Again, for me, what's of most importance to me is the public health and safety of the citizens of South Carolina. And South Carolina, like every other state in this country, has become a border state over the last 4 or 5 years. And now because if you open up the southern border, all the problems that come into this country, they go to the interior states of this country, of which we are one. So combating human trafficking, combating child predators, combating violent extremist organizations, gangs. I mean, listen, I've had like 7 or 8 drug trafficking cases directly involved with the Mexican drug cartels. We are prosecuting people operating on behalf of Mexican drug cartels here in South Carolina. This isn't in Texas or Arizona, this is in South Carolina.
So when we take a look at that, and we're going to wrap up with coming back to a tragedy that took place last week, there are other things going on that make a traffic incident rise to the level that your office is now taking this on.
Correct. And by the way, a shout out to the Fifth Circuit Solicitor's Office. I spoke to the solicitor, I've spoke to the chief of police. They were obviously very supportive and very cooperative. We've spoken to other law enforcement agencies at the federal and state level, but our office is currently engaged in ongoing investigations into other matters involving illegal immigration. That is as much as I can say right now to protect the operational security that we have. But because of the nature of this case, that is somewhat related to what, not somewhat, it is related to what we're doing. And so for that reason, we're taking. There will be a point in time in the future where I think I'll be able to talk more freely to the public, and you will see what we're doing, and people will understand, oh, that's why he took the case. But for right now, we want to obviously hold any individual who causes a traffic fatality, and again, this person is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law.
Right.
But we're going to bring justice to citizens of this state when they are harmed by anyone, illegal or otherwise. But also, more broadly speaking, we want to protect the citizens of this state from a lot of the things that the immigration issues, the illegal immigration issues, have created in our state, and we're trying to address those at the state level while working with our federal partners. That is why you see me engaging on national issues with the Trump administration when it comes to combating illegal immigration, because a lot of the problems I'm dealing with here in South Carolina are offsets of that.
So the problem isn't the problem, it's just indicative of the problem.
Symptom of a greater problem.
Attorney General Alan Wilson, thanks so much for taking the time to be a
it.
part of this. Really appreciate you being here. And for those of you who are watching, we appreciate so much. We will do everything we can to keep you updated on this story as it continues to move forward, and make sure, that you are connected to the Capitol.